stay calm and quiet for my presentation. So just quickly, I'm Sochi of Tarifica, and in just one sentence, Tarifica is the market leader for telecommunications and pricing data. And we have a partnership with Omdia, which I'm sure you know is a part of Informatech, the organisers of this event. And we essentially provide Omdia with the underlying data on top of which they do the analysis together with us. For example, we create charts like the one you're seeing now. So, as introduced by James, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the 5G pricing strategies we see today. And in particular, I'm going to narrow it down to the four main strategies that we see today, which are 5G by default, data tiers, speed tiers, and finally 5G rich app bundles. So before diving into each one, I'm just going to quickly give you an overview, which you see on the right hand side there. So as you can see, there are grey bubbles and blue bubbles. The grey bubbles represent data from 2020, the blue end of 2021. The y-axis, essentially the vertical, is the number of operators adopting each of the aforementioned strategy. So, for example, taking the very left, the 5G by default, in the end of 2020, there were roughly 30 odd operators using this strategy for their 5G pricing. And that decreased to about 20 by the end of 2021. So similarly for the data tiers, the speed tiers, and the 5G rich app bundles, for these cases, the number of operators using these strategies increased, and especially the data tiers. Perhaps moving on, one other point I would like to mention is if you add up all of the grey bubbles and also compare that to the blue bubbles, I think it's pretty obvious that there is more of total blue bubbles, which basically indicates that over the year, more and more operators have deployed 5G in their markets, which I think is, of course, very good news for this industry. So, without further ado, I will go into the actual strategies themselves. And given we're in Berlin, I've tried to bring examples from the German market. So first up is Deutsche Telekom in the 5G by default strategy. Now basically this strategy is there is no differentiation between 4G and 5G. So here's your plan, whether it's 4G or 5G, it doesn't matter, you get 5G anyway. So as you can see there, in red, all four postpaid plans by Deutsche Telekom, you automatically get 5G and nothing complicated there. So this is actually something, so I like to call it 5G by default. It's a nice way to offer 5G to your customers. But the flip side of that is you can call it, it's a do-nothing strategy. And so, from a kind of innovation and operator wanting to increase their RPU perspective, it's not the best of strategies. So there are two ways, as I mentioned there, it's really two sides of the same coin. You either mention it because it's a nice way to get customers onto 5G, however, it's not exactly interesting for the operator in terms of increasing their RPU. Next up is 1&1, or 1&1, I think in German, an MVNO, although they're of course trying to get their 5G, their own 5G network. So they are a typical example of the data tiers. If you remember, it's the strategy that is deployed the most. And so essentially, as you can see there, the middle plan, the 5G-L onwards, you get 5G. Whereas the first two on the left, which are LTE-S and LTE-M, you will only get LTE. So essentially, the more you pay, you get 5G. But in particular, this is a good example actually. If you compare LTE-M with 5G-L, I'm sorry, it's a bit small, but it's basically free for the first 6 months. And then for LTE-M, it's like €25 a month, and for the 5G-L, it's €30. So it's only €5 more. But the idea here is to say, for only €5 extra, you get 2.5 times the amount of gigabytes, so from 10 gigs to 25 gigs. And then on top of that as well, you get 5G speeds. So I mean, the idea is to kind of make that jump from LTE to 5G not very expensive, something that, to lure the customers to taking on that a little bit more expensive, but much faster, much more data included plans. So that's the second data tiers. I think that's still relatively logical and easy to understand. And then we move on to speed tiers. So Germany's great because they're all deploying different strategies. So this is by Telefonica O2. And so, as you can see, or as I'm about to explain, I should say, this is an example of speed tier, and the prerequisite for speed tiers is that the plans are unlimited. So all three plans you're seeing there right now are unlimited plans. So unlimited for experts, smart for all-rounders, and unlimited basic for beginners. So obviously, if they're all unlimited, the question is, so how do they differentiate the price? And that is through the speed tiers. So as you can see there, the unlimited for experts is 500 megabits per second, which is also, in fact, the fastest speed available currently on O2's network. By contrast, if you go to the right, the cheap option, let's say, you only get 2 megabits per second. That said, I mean, of course, as you all know, that's still pretty fast. It's good for daily activities. But the point here is, there's a differentiation between the speeds, and hence the name of speed tiers. So, that said, this strategy itself is not that new in the sense that, for example, in Finland, this strategy has been deployed by all MNOs before 5G. It's been pretty much standard for it, as long as I can remember, in Finland. But with the arrival of 5G, we're seeing more operators essentially having a go and trying out this strategy. In particular, we see Vodafone in their European footprint. I'm sure some of you are aware, like UK, Italy, Spain, a few of the East European countries as well. Not in Germany, interestingly enough, as it's one of the few European footprints that they don't deploy this plan, as it's O2 in Germany. And then a few other places like Swisscom, Sunrise in Switzerland. But that said, so it's been around for a bit, but it's really yet to gain traction. So it is an interesting concept. It's relatively innovative, but it's not really caught fire. And I'll talk about that a little bit in conjunction with the next and final strategy, which is the 5G Rich App Bundles. So here I'm going to jump out of Germany because this is typically a strategy which we see more in Asia. And so this is an example from Thailand, AIS. And as the strategy name suggests, it's basically bundling 5G rich apps. So really apps which use 5G, okay, with the plan. So as you can see on the far right there, so you get augmented reality, virtual reality, and cloud gaming services bundled into that plan. So one point of cloud, I often get this question, but this is different to zero-rated apps. For example, in Germany, Deutsche Telekom and Vodafone, they have, on their, especially the higher tier plans, they zero rate like Netflix, Apple Music, and all that kind of thing. So that's zero rating, which is different because, well, one, because it's zero rating, and two, because those things don't necessarily use 5G. It's not a 5G rich app, as we call it. And, well, if any of you are kind of regulatory intensive, there's also the problem. Vodafone and Deutsche Telekom, they got a little telling off by the NETZA, the regulator in Germany, that zero rating is against the principles of net neutrality. So I'm not going to go into that today, but there's also all of that which is going on right now. But that said, I think that gives you a good idea, even with your sore heads from last night, an idea of the 4 different strategies, the main ones that we see. There are a few others, like you pay extra for a day of 5G, etc. But these are the 4 main ones that we see today. And so just to kind of a little wrap up, if you remember the first chart that I showed you, is the 5G rich app bundles, which was on the far right. And on that chart, the further right you go, the more innovative that we believe is the strategy. And why do we think that? Well, first, it's interesting that essentially the operators who kind of first introduced this kind of strategy with 5G was the Far Eastern operators like Japan by origin, China, South Korea. And while I can't say that it's all thanks to this, they did see a little bit of an increase in their ARPU using this strategy upon introduction of their 5G plans. So that's certainly something to keep in mind, and it's very likely why we're also seeing, like Thailand that I just showed you earlier, other Asian countries are now following suit. But more importantly, why this strategy do we believe is the most innovative and will increase ARPU? And really the simple answer is because the users need to really to touch, to feel, to experience, to see what that 5G enables you to do. So because we, as in you and I, we're in this industry probably for a long time, we kind of, for us, 5G, MVNO, all this is so obvious, we breathe those terminology. And we sometimes forget that the average Joe walking down the street has no idea what 5G means. I mean, I've seen surveys which suggest that 50-60% of people, they don't actually know what it is. But more importantly, they don't care what it is. And that's something we all have to keep in mind. They don't, the average Joe does not care what is 5G, what is 4G, what is an MVNO, what's technology behind it, now it's slicing, the MDB, everything. So that's something we always have to keep in mind, that we have to go really to the customer perspective. And when we do that, when we think that way, telling them that, hey, you're going to get 2 gigabits per second speed, it just doesn't resonate with them because they don't understand what it actually enables. So for example, if we go back 10 years, for example, when 4G was introduced to the market, was it that people moved on to 4G because it was faster? I would argue no. It's because it was thanks to the iPhone, the smartphones that arrived, the app stores, and the applications which ran on these smartphones. It's those things that the users could see, could feel, they could swipe. It was these things that allowed, or rather encouraged the users to move onto 4G. So it's that again that we need for 5G, something that the customers can understand and feel. That it's okay, I can do this something amazing, something that's cool, that's awesome. And for that I need 5G, okay, well I don't know what 5G is, but I'll take it because I want to do this experience, this awesome thing. So just one last point, and then it's like, yeah, the cloud game's been around for ages, yeah. And I agree, I do agree. But the one thing that's interesting, I think, today is combining that with augmented reality and the XR, as we call it. And I do believe there's potential. Of course, admittedly, there's nothing today that suggests that you need 5G to be able to do this. But I would like you to cast your memory back roughly 5 years. Pokemon Go. I'm sure most of you remember that phenomenon. It was crazy. It was crazy. If you remember, so when that really burst onto the market, everyone was doing it. I'd go to town square, and then there'd be like tens of people just in there. What's that, sorry? Pokemon Go. Yeah. There'd be like boys, girls, kids, students, mums and dads, even grandma, grandpas, all in town square, all sitting down. You remember, right? I mean, it was surreal. If you took a step back and looked at it, it was just crazy. But it's those kinds of things that I believe, there's the potential there. I mean, obviously Pokemon Go doesn't require 5G, but I do think that points us into the right direction. When there's a phenomenon like that, or even Angry Birds a little bit before that, I mean, nobody hears them anymore. They're still around, by the way. But it's those things that I believe, or we believe, that will drive the 5G. So, of course, price matching is important. And what's more important is to make sure that the users gain that experience, that they can actually feel, touch, see what 5G can do. And it's not they subscribe to new 5G, it's that they subscribe to a plan which enables them to do that something new, that new experience. So with that, I'd like to end my presentation. We have a stand over there in the corner as well, so be happy to talk to you about anything related to land pricing. Thank you very much.
We have a little bit of time for some questions, so do we have any questions from the audience? If you do, raise your hand, we'll send you a microphone. The lady in red, thank you.
Hi.
We've got a microphone coming.
So first of all, I can really relate to that focus on, customer engagement and usability. And, as a representative of Gen Z Y, so I even think it's crucial to understand that. But how do you really take this insightful understanding into products? What's leading you? You're saying this is what they want, and we need to listen to that, the end users actually. So how do you take that insight into reality? When we know that we have now IoT, the metaverse, all those things, how do you focus the telecom industry into this understanding?
Yes, thank you. So my cheap answer to that is, if I knew, I wouldn't be here right now. No, that's a very good point. And there are a few answers to that. As you mentioned, there's IoT and various other things. So one thing, which I think has been discussed also yesterday, is there will be a separation of different use cases. So there's going to be much more use cases. But more importantly, I think, just like when the iPhone came, or when Pokemon Go came, when Angry Birds came, we can't know what we don't know. Okay, so we can't see into the future, so it's difficult. But what's important is to not stop. I mean, if you remember, like Steve Jobs, he was kicked out of his own company before he came back and created the iPhone. And for gaming as well, perhaps I can mention there's a company called Hatch, so Hatch is a mobile subscription type cloud gaming company, a subsidiary of Rovio, the makers of Angry Birds. So they, I think it was in 2017 they set up, but they actually folded beginning of last year. And I'm often told, yes, it's a failure, it's not going to work. But I think, we have to, as Einstein, I think it was, said, failure is only failure when you stop trying. So I understand this is not the silver bullet, but we have to, we have to know that looking at history, there's always been those moments where something new hits the market. And, we have to make sure, from a telco perspective, in your case, that the 5G network is ready, and then the new generation with new ideas can really come up with the idea where the casual gamer, despite being casual, would require things like 5G, things like augmented reality, to be ready so that when that hits the market, all the customers can move on to that.
For example, when I think about it, so impact is something that's very important to Gen Zs and to the young generation. So I know that we try to enable SaaS in order to really produce, all the gas and all those things, and really help to provide this solution for the impact environment and so on.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, there are very many aspects, I think, environment as well, especially that you mentioned. And I think, in a way, I'm probably too old to come up with the best ideas. We're unfortunately not the most youngest here anymore. But no, certainly, I think it's your generation that needs to essentially trust the telcos, the technology there, and come up with the best ideas. Well, I can't say that directly here, can I? Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your question. I'm very glad you asked that, Sochi, by the way, because it was a really good